I met Colin Matthews at the hotel swimming pool on Koh Samui during what should have been an ordinary Tuesday afternoon in March. He was nursing a beer, staring at the turquoise water with the vacant expression of a man whose entire world had just imploded. What I didn't know then was that I was looking at someone who'd just discovered that love, revenge, and identity could intertwine in ways that would make your blood run cold. This is the story of how one moment of cruelty in a Pattaya bar came back to destroy a man's life, and how the person he humiliated waited an entire year to serve her revenge, perfectly chilled. Colin was 53 years old, recently divorced and carrying the particular kind of loneliness that settles into your bones after 26 years of marriage and in lawyers' offices and divided furniture. He was a software consultant from Munich, methodical and precise in everything he did. His ex-wife had left him for her personal trainer, a cliché so predictable it made the wound somehow deeper. His daughter had sided with her mother, his friends had awkwardly split into camps, and Colin found himself living in a sterile apartment that smelled like IKEA furniture and defeat. Thailand was supposed to be his reset button. His colleague Klaus had insisted on it. "You need warmth, Colin. Sun, beaches, forget Germany for a while." So Colin booked 2 weeks on Koh Samui, a place Klaus promised was more upscale than Pattaya, more peaceful than Phuket. What Klaus didn't mention was that he'd also taken Colin to Pattaya the year before, to a bar district that blazed with neon and pulsed with music so loud you could feel it in your chest. Subscribe right now if you've ever wondered how a single moment of cruelty can come back to haunt you years later. Because what Colin did in that Pattaya bar seemed insignificant at the time, but you're about to discover why that one act of public humiliation would cost him everything he thought he'd found. That night in Pattaya, 12 months before Koh Samui, Colin and Klaus had been drinking. Not drunk, just loosened up enough to laugh at Klaus's terrible jokes and feel like maybe life could be fun again. They'd wandered into a bar called Electric Blue, all chrome and colored lights, where beautiful women in tight dresses circulated among the tourists. One of them approached Colin, tall, graceful, with long dark hair and features that could have graced magazine covers. Her name, she said, was Superporn. Colin remembered thinking the name sounded melodic. She spoke decent English with that lilting Thai accent, touched his arm when she laughed, made him feel seen for the first time in months. And then Klaus leaned over, whispered something in Colin's ear that made his blood freeze. The warm interest in Colin's eyes transformed instantly into disgust. "You're a man," Colin said loudly, pulling his arm away as if he'd touched something contaminated. The music didn't stop, but conversations around them did. "You're a fucking lady boy." Superporn's smile didn't waver, but something flickered in her eyes, something dark and cold that vanished so quickly Colin later convinced himself he'd imagined it. "I'm a woman," she said quietly, "just not born as one." "That's sick," Colin heard himself saying, his German precision now weaponized into cruelty. "You should tell people. It's dishonest. It's disgusting that you'd try to trick someone." He was standing now, his voice carrying across the bar. "You're not a woman. You'll never be a woman. You're just a man in a dress." Klaus tried to quiet him, but the alcohol and wounded pride had made Colin vicious. Several tourists laughed nervously. A bartender looked uncomfortable. Superporn stood there, absorbing every word like blows, her hands trembling slightly as she reached for her small purse. "I'll remember you," she said softly. And then she was gone, disappearing into the neon chaos of Walking Street. Colin forgot about her almost immediately. He and Klaus bar-hopped until dawn, and Colin flew back to Munich the next day with a headache and vague memories of colorful drinks and Klaus's terrible karaoke. The incident in Electric Blue became an anecdote, something Klaus sometimes brought up when they'd been drinking. "Remember that lady boy you went off on? Man, you were savage." Colin had laughed. He'd actually laughed about it. 12 months later, on Koh Samui, Colin was trying to rebuild himself. Morning swims, healthy breakfasts, sunset walks on Chaweng Beach. He'd even started meditating, sitting cross-legged in his hotel room, trying to quiet the voice that whispered he was too old, too boring, too fundamentally unlovable to start again. That's when he saw her. She was walking along the beach at sunset, the orange light catching her dark hair and making her skin glow like burnished gold. She wore a simple white dress that moved with the evening breeze, and when she bent to examine a shell, Colin felt something stir in his chest that he thought his ex-wife had killed forever. Her name, she told him when he finally worked up the courage to approach, was Pim. Just Pim. She was 28, worked in hotel management in Bangkok, and was on Koh Samui visiting family. Her English was excellent, her laugh infectious, and when she looked at Colin, he felt like maybe he wasn't invisible after all. They had dinner that first night at a beachfront restaurant, where the waves crashed close enough to spray mist across their table. Pim asked about his life, listened intently to his stories about Germany, laughed at his self-deprecating jokes about middle-aged divorce. She shared just enough about herself to seem real. A difficult mother, dreams of opening her own hotel someday, a love of old movies, but kept enough mystery to stay intriguing. Stop. Hit that subscribe button right now, because what happens next will make you question everything you think you know about identity, revenge, and the masks we all wear. Write in the comments, have you ever encountered someone who wasn't who they seemed? Because Pim was about to become the most dangerous person in Colin's life. They spent the next 3 days inseparable. Morning beach walks where they collected shells, afternoon explorations of the island on a rented scooter, Pim's arms wrapped around Colin's waist. Evening dinners where the conversation flowed as smoothly as the wine. Colin felt like he was in a movie, one of those late-life romance films where the damaged protagonist gets a second chance at happiness. On the fourth night, everything changed. They'd had dinner at Pim's family home, a modest house inland where her elderly aunt served traditional Thai food and smiled at Colin with warm approval. Afterward, Pim suggested they go to her hotel room. She was staying, she explained, at a small boutique hotel on the quieter side of the island. The room was elegant, minimalist, with gauzy curtains that moved in the sea breeze. They sat on the balcony drinking whiskey and talking about the future. Colin found himself saying things he'd never said before, about loneliness, about feeling invisible in his own marriage, about the terror of starting over at 53. Pim listened, her hand finding his in the darkness. "You're not invisible to me," she said. "I see exactly who you are." That night changed everything. The boundary between reason and desire blurred, and Colin woke in the arms of someone he was falling in love with. Someone who made him feel young and wanted and possible again. Morning light filtered through the curtains, and Pim was already awake, watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "I need to tell you something," she said, and Colin felt a spike of anxiety. Here it comes, he thought. The boyfriend, the husband, the reason this was too good to be true. But Pim just smiled and kissed his forehead. "I'm falling in love with you," she said, "and that terrifies me." Colin's relief was so profound he almost laughed. "Me too," he said. I'm falling for you too." The next week was a fever dream. Colin extended his stay. They talked about him returning to Koh Samui regularly, maybe eventually splitting time between Germany and Thailand. Pim was perfect in ways that made Colin's ex-wife seem like a stranger. Attentive without being clingy. Independent but affectionate. Interesting without being demanding. But small things started to feel off. Pim was careful about certain situations. She always changed in the bathroom, never in front of him. She deflected questions about her childhood with vague answers. Once, when Colin suggested they go swimming, she declined with a headache that vanished an hour later. She kept her phone face down and became evasive when calls came through at odd hours. Colin told himself he was being paranoid, seeing problems where none existed. His ex-wife had made him suspicious, that's all. Pim was just private, just modest. There was nothing sinister in wanting to maintain some mystery. 2 months after returning to Munich, Colin flew back to Thailand. He'd arranged to work remotely for a month, rented a small apartment in Bangkok near where Pim said she worked. They settled into a domestic rhythm that felt like practice for something permanent. Pim cooking breakfast in the small kitchen, Colin working from the living room, evening walks along the Chao Phraya River. Then came the money. It started small. Pim's mother needed surgery. Could Colin lend €3,000? Her brother's business needed an investment. Could Colin help with $5,000? The requests came with documentation, with promises of repayment, with tears of gratitude. Colin paid willingly. This was what you did for someone you loved, wasn't it? By month 4, Colin had transferred nearly €20,000. His savings were depleting, but he told himself it was an investment in their future. When he suggested coming to Bangkok for Christmas, Pim became agitated. Her family, she explained, was traditional. They needed more time. Maybe Easter instead. Colin's daughter called him during a video chat and barely recognized him. "Dad, you look different," she said, concerned. "Are you okay?" He wasn't okay. He was caught in something he couldn't quite name. A web that tightened every time he tried to pull away. When he suggested they slow down on the financial help, Pim became distant. When he questioned inconsistencies in her stories, she cried and accused him of not trusting her. Pause this video and subscribe immediately. The next revelation will make your blood run cold, and you'll want to share this with everyone you know. Comment below. Have you spotted the red flags yet? Because Colin was about to discover that every touch, every kiss, every whispered "I love you" was part of a plan that began in a Pattaya bar 12 months before. The truth came on a Wednesday in February. Colin was in Pim's apartment. She'd finally agreed to let him visit her place in Bangkok. When she excused herself to take a call, Colin needed to use the bathroom, pushed open the door without thinking, and saw everything. The bathroom was small, steam still clinging to the mirror from Pim's recent shower. On the counter, scattered like evidence at a crime scene, were prescription bottles. Hormone therapy, estrogen, spironolactone, anti-androgens. The labels were in Thai and English, and they all bore the same name: Superporn Chanarong. Colin's mind went blank, then flooded with memories he'd buried. Electric blue, neon lights, a tall, graceful figure in a tight dress. "You're a fucking lady boy," his own voice, drunk and cruel, echoing through a Pattaya. He stumbled backward, knocking over a small wastebasket. Inside, crumpled at the bottom, was a photograph. Colin picked it up with trembling hands. It showed Pim, no, Superporn, before the surgeries. before the final transformation. The face was the same, but Colin could see it now. The ghost of the person he'd humiliated still visible beneath the woman she'd become. The door opened. Pim stood there, phone still in her hand. And when she saw Colin holding the photograph, her expression shifted into something he'd never seen before. Not anger, not fear. Satisfaction. "Hello again, Colin," she said in a voice that was suddenly different, stripped of its soft warmth. "You told me I'd never be a woman, that I was disgusting, that I should tell people the truth." She stepped into the bathroom, closing the door behind her. "Well, I've been telling you the truth for 4 months. You just didn't want to see it." Colin felt the walls closing in, his breath coming in short gasps. You planned this?" Superporn laughed, and it was nothing like Pim's gentle laugh. It was sharp, brittle, triumphant. "Planned? Colin, I spent a year planning this. Do you have any idea how much it cost? The surgeries, the voice training, the language classes to perfect my accent. I invested $40,000 into becoming someone you could love. And you did love me, didn't you? You loved me so much you gave me 20,000 euros and were planning to marry me." The room spun. Colin grabbed the sink for support. The family, the mother's surgery, the brother, all lies. Beautiful, profitable lies. The aunt you met, an actress. The house, rented for the day. The job in hotel management. I work in a bar, Colin. The same bar where you destroyed me in front of 50 people. She pulled out her phone, swiped through images. What you, completely naked and vulnerable in ways I'm sure your daughter would find fascinating. Colin's blood turned to ice. You wouldn't. I wouldn't. You stood in a public bar and called me disgusting. You said I'd never be a woman. You made people laugh at me, Colin. Do you know what that feels like? To have strangers laugh at your pain because some German tourist decided to make you his punchline. Her voice cracked, just for a moment, showing the wound beneath the revenge. I wanted to die that night. I went home and looked at the bottle of pills and thought about ending it all. But then I realized something. You gave me a gift. You gave me motivation. Subscribe to this channel before we continue, because what I'm about to reveal will show you how far someone will go when you turn their humanity into a joke. Your comment might save someone from making Colin's mistake. Write what you would do in this situation. Colin tried to speak, to apologize, to explain. But Superporn held up her hand. I don't want your apology. I don't want your explanation. I want you to feel what I felt. Humiliated, powerless, betrayed by someone you trusted. She held up her phone. These photos go to your daughter unless you transfer 50,000 euros into my account by tomorrow. And before you think about going to the police, remember that everything we did was consensual. You pursued me. You gave me money willingly. You chose to sleep with me. Multiple times, actually. This is blackmail, Colin managed to say. This is justice, Superporn corrected. You get to choose, Colin. Pay me or watch your life explode. Your daughter will see these photos. Your ex-wife will see them. Your colleagues at work will see them. Everyone will know that the man who publicly humiliated a transgender woman ended up falling in love with one. The irony will be delicious. She left him there, standing in that small bathroom surrounded by prescription bottles and shattered illusions. Colin didn't remember how long he stayed there. When he finally emerged, the apartment was empty, except for a note on the kitchen table with banking details and a deadline. Tomorrow at midnight. Colin spent that night in his hotel room, spiraling through shock, rage, humiliation, and a strange, unwanted understanding. He'd done this. Not the blackmail, not the elaborate deception, but he'd planted the seeds 12 months ago with his cruelty. He'd taken someone's vulnerability and weaponized it for laughs in a bar he'd never see again. But understanding didn't solve his problem. He couldn't pay 50,000 euros. His savings were already depleted. He couldn't go to the police without risking exactly what Superporn threatened. He couldn't call his daughter and explain. The trap was perfect, because every move led to destruction. On Thursday morning, Colin did something unexpected. He went back to Superporn's apartment building and waited. When she emerged at noon, heading to her scooter, Colin was there. "I want to talk," he said. "Not about the money, not about the photos. I want to understand." Superporn looked at him with suspicion. "There's nothing to understand. You pay or you suffer." "Why me?" Colin asked. There must have been other men in that bar. Other people who were cruel. Why spend a year of your life, $40,000, all that effort, just to destroy me? For a moment, something flickered across Superporn's face. Then she sighed. "Because you looked me in the eyes when you said it. Everyone else looked away, laughed nervously, pretended they didn't hear. But you looked right at me and told me I was disgusting. You saw me as a person, just long enough to make sure I knew you saw me as something less than human. That's why." They stood there in the Bangkok heat, two people wounded by each other in different ways. Colin took a breath. "I'm sorry," he said. "I know it changes nothing. I know it doesn't, but I'm genuinely sorry. You didn't deserve that. No one deserves that." Superporn's eyes narrowed. "Your apology doesn't get you out of this." "I know," Colin said, "but I need you to hear it anyway. What I said was cruel and wrong. You are a woman. You were a woman then, you're a woman now. I was drunk and bitter, and I took my own pain out on you because it was easy. That was cowardice." "Beautiful speech," Superporn said coldly. "Still costs 50,000 euros. "I don't have it," Colin said simply. "You already took 20,000. My savings are gone. My divorce was expensive. I could borrow from my daughter, but that would mean telling her everything anyway. So either way, you win. You've already destroyed me." Superporn studied him, trying to detect manipulation. "Then I release the photos." "Do it," Colin said, and meant it. "I'll survive. My daughter loves me even if she's disappointed. My ex-wife already thinks I'm pathetic. My colleagues will gossip for a week, and then forget. But you'll always know you spent a year of your life and $40,000 making someone suffer because they made you suffer. Is that who you want to be? Write your prediction right now in the comments. What do you think happens next? Does Superporn release the photos? Does Colin find a way out? Because what actually happened surprised everyone, including me. What Colin didn't know was that someone else had been watching. Her name was Detective Somchai Ratana, and she'd been investigating a series of romance scams targeting foreign men in Thailand. Superporn wasn't her primary suspect. That was a larger network operating across multiple cities. But Superporn's elaborate revenge plot had pinged Somchai's radar when Colin's bank flagged unusual overseas transfers. Somchai had been following Colin for 3 days, building a case, when she witnessed the confrontation outside Superporn's apartment. She'd heard everything through directional microphones, and what she heard complicated her investigation in ways she hadn't anticipated. That evening, Colin received a call from an unknown number. Detective Somchai introduced herself and asked him to come to the police station. Colin's heart sank. This was it. Superporn had followed through, and now he was being investigated for what exactly? Dating a transgender woman? That wasn't illegal. But when Colin arrived, Detective Somchai showed him something that changed everything. A file. A thick file, containing profiles of 12 other men who'd been scammed by Superporn's network. Except, Superporn wasn't the mastermind. She was a victim too. Her name appears in our investigation 8 months ago, Somchai explained. She was recruited by a larger operation that specializes in targeting men who've been cruel to transgender individuals. They identify the targets through social media, bar reports, travel forums where people brag about their close calls with ladyboys. Then, they offer transgender women like Superporn a deal. We'll pay for your surgery, train you, set you up, and you get to keep 30% of whatever you extract from your target. Colin felt sick. So this wasn't even about me specifically? Oh, it was about you, Somchai corrected. Superporn chose you from a list of candidates. The organization offered her 6 different men, all with similar profiles. Divorced, lonely, recently cruel to transgender individuals in public. She chose you because of what you said to her. That part was real. The network just provided the resources to make her revenge profitable for everyone. What happens now? Colin asked. That depends, Somchai said. We can arrest Superporn on blackmail and fraud charges. You'll get nothing back, and you'll likely have to testify in a lengthy trial that will expose everything anyway. Or you can help us catch the people running this network. Be bait. Colin looked at the detective in disbelief. You want me to continue being scammed? I want you to wear a wire and meet with the handlers. Superporn doesn't know we're on to her yet. If you can get her to introduce you to the people she works with, maybe by offering to invest in their business, we can shut down an operation that's destroyed dozens of lives. Not just the men they scam, but the transgender women they recruit and exploit. Colin spent that night thinking about his choices. He could walk away, return to Munich, lick his wounds, and spend the rest of his life as a cautionary tale. Or he could do something that mattered. The next morning he called Superporn. I want to make a deal, he said. Not pay you to keep quiet. I want to invest in what you're doing. Expand it, scale it up. There are thousands of men like me out there, and I know how to reach them. Superporn was suspicious at first. But Colin was convincing. He talked about his humiliation becoming profitable, about understanding the psychology of lonely, middle-aged men, about having access to online communities where divorced men plan Thai vacations. He was, he explained, perfectly positioned to help find targets. It took 2 weeks, but Superporn eventually agreed to introduce him to her handlers. The meeting was set for a coffee shop in downtown Bangkok. Colin wore the wire Detective Somchai provided, a device so small it was nearly invisible in his collar. The handlers were nothing like Colin expected. Not shadowy criminals, but a middle-aged couple who looked like they could be someone's parents. They ran the operation like a business, with spreadsheets tracking ROI, client acquisition costs, and conversion rates. They spoke about trauma and revenge, with the clinical detachment of consultants. "We prefer to think of it as restorative justice," the woman explained, stirring her coffee calmly. "These men humiliate our girls in public, treat them as less than human, and face no consequences. We simply monetize their hypocrisy. They're willing to love and desire women like Superporn, as long as they don't know the truth. We make them pay for that privilege." Colin listened, asked questions, played the interested investor. The wire caught everything: names, locations, banking details, the entire operational structure. When Detective Somchai and her team moved in 30 minutes later, arresting the couple and 3 associates who'd shown up to discuss expansion plans, Superporn realized what had happened. She looked at Colin across the coffee shop as police handcuffed her, and her expression was complex. Anger, yes, but also something like respect. "You chose the moral high ground," she said. "How noble. Does it feel good, Colin? Catching the people who made you feel stupid?" "No," Colin said honestly. "It feels hollow. Because you're right about one thing. Men like me do deserve consequences. Just not these consequences. Not exploitation and blackmail, and being turned into profit margins." Pause and subscribe if you want to understand how victims can become victimizers, and how the cycle of cruelty perpetuates itself. Comment below, where does punishment end and revenge begin? Because Colin's story doesn't end with arrests. The trial took 6 months. Superporn and the network faced multiple charges: fraud, blackmail, conspiracy. Colin had to testify. And yes, his daughter learned everything. She was hurt, angry, confused about why her father had kept this secret. But eventually, she also told him something that surprised him. "Dad, you were an asshole in that bar," she said during a video call. "And what happened to you? That was wrong too." Both things can be true. Colin's involvement in the investigation made him a minor celebrity in certain online circles. Reporters wanted to interview him about romance scams, about transgender issues, about middle-aged vulnerability. He declined most requests, but he did agree to speak at a support group for people who'd been scammed in Asia. That's where he met Jennifer, a widow from London, who'd lost £30,000 to a romance scam in Vietnam. They talked after the meeting, then kept talking over coffee, then over dinner. Their relationship developed slowly, carefully, both of them carrying scars that made trust complicated. Superporn received a reduced sentence after cooperating with authorities and testifying against her handlers. 18 months in a Thai prison, followed by deportation back to her home province. Before she was sentenced, Colin attended the hearing. He didn't speak, just sat in the public gallery and watched. After the judge delivered the verdict, Superporn was led out in handcuffs. She saw Colin in the crowd and stopped, forcing the guards to pause. They looked at each other across the courtroom. Two people whose cruelty and pain had collided in ways neither had anticipated. "I forgive you," Colin said, loud enough for her to hear. "For what it's worth, I forgive you." Superporn's eyes filled with tears. "I don't forgive you," she said. "But maybe someday I will." That exchange haunted Colin for months afterward. He started seeing a therapist who specialized in trauma and manipulation. The sessions were painful, forcing him to confront not just what had been done to him, but what he'd done to spark it. The cruelty in the Pattaya bar hadn't been an aberration. It was a symptom of how he'd been treating people for years. His ex-wife, his daughter, his colleagues, taking his own pain and making it someone else's problem. A year after the trial, Colin received a letter. It came from a women's prison in northern Thailand. Written in careful English on lined paper, Superporn's handwriting was elegant, controlled. "Colin, I've had time to think here about what happened, about choices, about revenge. My therapist says I need to take accountability for my actions regardless of what provoked them. She's probably right, though I hate admitting it. You were cruel to me. I was cruel back. We both used each other's humanity as a weapon. The network that recruited me saw my pain and turned it into profit. You saw my identity and turned it into a punchline. Somewhere in all of that, we both lost something. I don't know if I forgive you yet, but I'm working on it. Not for you, for me, because carrying this rage around is exhausting, and I want to be more than what you made me feel that night in Pattaya. Maybe someday, when I'm released, when enough time has passed, we could meet for coffee, not as victim and perpetrator, not as scammer and target, but as two people who hurt each other and are trying to be better. Maybe not. I don't know yet. Take care of yourself, Colin, and be kind to people, especially those who are different from you. You have no idea what they're carrying. Superporn. Colin read the letter 3 times, then called his therapist. They spent the session discussing forgiveness, accountability, and whether reconciliation was possible or even advisable. The answer, they decided, was that some wounds don't heal cleanly. Sometimes the best you can do is acknowledge the damage and choose not to inflict more. 2 years after Koh Samui, Colin and Jennifer got married in a quiet ceremony in Munich. His daughter attended, gave a speech that made everyone cry, and whispered to Colin afterward that she was proud of how he'd changed. Not fixed himself. There was too much damage for that. But changed. Become more careful with his words, more aware of his capacity to wound. Colin never did meet Superporn for that coffee. She was released from prison and moved back to her home province, where she started working with an organization that supported transgender youth. She gave talks about her experience, about how pain can twist you into someone you don't recognize, about the difference between justice and revenge. Sometimes Colin thought about reaching out, but he never did. Some apologies, he'd learned, need to be left unspoken. Some bridges are healthier burned. The best he could do was carry the lesson forward, make different choices, be the person he should have been in that Pattaya bar. On quiet nights, when Jennifer was asleep and Colin couldn't, he'd think about that moment when Superporn held up the photograph and said, "I've been telling you the truth for 4 months." Because she had been, in a way. She'd shown him who she really was, strong, capable, worthy of love, and he'd believed it. The only lie was thinking she'd shown him for love rather than revenge. But even that wasn't entirely true, his therapist pointed out. People are complicated, she said. Superporn could have genuinely developed feelings for you while still pursuing revenge. Emotions aren't binary. You can hate someone and love them. You can want to hurt someone and save them. That's what makes us human. Colin still swam most mornings, still traveled occasionally, still carried the prescription bottles and photographs in his memory like scar tissue. He and Jennifer talked about their traumas carefully, gently, understanding that they were both broken in ways that would never fully heal. That's the thing about stories like this. They don't end with tidy resolutions or perfect justice. Colin never got his money back. Superporn never got true satisfaction from her revenge. The network's victims never felt whole again. Everyone just carried on, scarred and wiser, trying not to hurt anyone else the way they'd been hurt. The last time I spoke with Colin was back at that swimming pool on Koh Samui, 3 years after everything happened. He was there with Jennifer for their anniversary, and we ran into each other by chance.
We talked for hours, and he told me everything you've just heard. What did you learn? I asked him finally. If you had to distill it into something simple. Colin thought for a long moment, watching the sunset paint the water orange and gold. That cruelty has a price, he said. Not karma, not divine justice. Just basic human cause and effect. I hurt someone, and that hurt came back to me, transformed into something I couldn't have imagined. And the scary part, I deserved some of it. Not the blackmail, not the manipulation, but the wake-up call? Yeah, I needed that. He paused, then added, the other thing I learned is that people are more than the worst thing they've ever done. Superporn blackmailed me, yes. But she also showed me what determination looks like. What it takes to build yourself into someone new. I was cruel to her, yes. But I'm also capable of change. Of making better choices. Of being kind. We're both more complex than our worst moments. Subscribe to this channel and share this story with someone who needs to hear it. Write in the comments about a moment when you were cruel or someone was cruel to you, and what you learned from it. Because Colin's story isn't unique. We all carry the capacity to wound and be wounded. The question is what we do with that power. That conversation at the pool was the last time I saw Colin Matthews. But his story stayed with me. A reminder that identity, revenge, and redemption are rarely simple. That the people we hurt don't vanish into the night. They carry our cruelty forward. Sometimes transformed into something we don't recognize until it's too late. If you're watching this, and you've ever humiliated someone for being different, Colin's message to you is simple. Stop. The person you mock today might be the person who destroys you tomorrow. And even if they're not, the cruelty itself diminishes you in ways you won't recognize until you look in the mirror and see what you've become. And if you're watching this as someone who's been humiliated, who's been made to feel less than human because of who you are, Superporn's message is equally important. Don't let that pain turn you into what hurt you. Revenge might feel satisfying in the moment, but it's poison in the long term. The network that recruited superporn didn't care about her justice. They cared about profit. They used her trauma to make money, and she ended up in prison while they moved on to new victims. The real victory isn't making your tormentors suffer. It's building a life so authentic and full that their cruelty becomes irrelevant. It's being so completely yourself that their opinions can't touch you. Superporn learned that in prison, working through her anger with a therapist, finally becoming the woman she wanted to be. Not for revenge, not to prove Colin wrong, but for herself. Colin learned his lesson too, though it cost him 20,000 euros, his peace of mind, and years of therapy to process. He learned that casual cruelty isn't casual at all, that words have weight, that the people they encounter in bars and beaches and hotel pools are carrying their own pain, and we have no right to add to it for our own amusement. This story doesn't have a happy ending, but it has an honest one. Two damaged people collided, hurt each other in different ways, and both ended up changed. Not better necessarily, but different, more aware, more careful, more human. The world is full of Colin Matthews and superporns, people whose pain intersects in destructive ways. The question isn't whether you'll hurt someone or be hurt. That's inevitable. The question is what you'll do with that pain. Will you transform it into revenge, into growth, into another cycle of cruelty? Colin chose growth eventually. Superporn chose revenge first, then growth. Both of them paid prices for their choices, prices that couldn't be refunded or reclaimed. But they also both survived, carried on, found ways to be more than their worst moments. That's the lesson, if there is one. We are all capable of both cruelty and kindness, of hurting and healing, of destroying and building. The person you are in your worst moment doesn't have to be the person you are forever, but it starts with acknowledging the damage, accepting the consequences, and choosing differently next time. Colin still thinks about superporn sometimes, wonders if she's okay, if she's happy, if she ever found peace. He hopes so. Not because it absolves him, but because despite everything, he recognizes that she deserved better than what he gave her that night in Pattaya. And superporn sometimes thinks about Colin too. Wonders if he's still swimming in the mornings, still working through his demons, still trying to be better. She hopes so. Not because it justifies what she did, but because she recognizes that revenge didn't heal her the way she thought it would. Maybe someday they will meet for that coffee. Maybe they'll sit across from each other, two people scarred by their intersection, and find a way to forgive that's bigger than either of them. Or maybe they won't. Maybe some stories don't need resolution, just acknowledgement. Either way, they're both still here, still trying, still carrying forward the lessons they learned from each other. And in the end, maybe that's enough. Not perfect justice or poetic redemption, but the messy, complicated reality of two people who hurt each other and chose, eventually, to stop the cycle. The pool in Koh Samui is still there. The beach where Colin and Pim walked is still beautiful at sunset. The bar in Pattaya, where it all started, is probably still serving drinks and hosting tourists who have no idea that their casual words might echo into someone's future. Life goes on. Stories continue, and somewhere in Thailand and Germany, Two people who were victim and victimizer, scammer and target, continued trying to be better than their worst moments. That's all any of us can do.
I met Colin Matthews at the hotel swimming pool on Koh Samui during what should have been an ordinary Tuesday afternoon in March. He was nursing a beer, staring at the turquoise water with the vacant expression of a man whose entire world had just imploded. What I didn't know then was that I was looking at